What if the biggest corporate collapse of the decade wasn't actually caused by some sudden shift in the economy,
Right.
or, a malicious competitor, or even a bad product? Like, what if you looked at a truly catastrophic failure? Think of those classic cautionary tales, the massive tech giants that just evaporated overnight.
Oh, yeah, the ones we love to dissect.
Exactly. What if you realized the root cause was simply a room full of absolute geniuses who were physically, cognitively incapable of understanding each other?
I mean, what's fascinating here is that it completely upends how we are trained to analyze failure.
Right.
We are so conditioned to look for binary, measurable disasters. We want to point to a spreadsheet and say, oh, there it is. The supply chain broke right here.
Yeah, or the interest rates shifted there.
Exactly. We want external villain.
Totally. It's deeply comforting to blame the market, isn't it? It absolves us. We like our problems to be visible and neatly categorized.
Right here.
But the moment you step off the trading floor and into the actual closed-door boardroom where the decisions are being made, where the internal team dynamics and the quiet, everyday leadership moments happen, that neat little spreadsheet of excuses just disintegrates.
It completely falls apart.
We're looking at a landscape of corporate failure that is incredibly murky. I mean, it's invisible.
And that invisibility is exactly why it's so dangerous. We spend billions of dollars globally, consulting on the symptoms.
Right, treating the surface level stuff.
Yeah, we try to treat the missed deadlines, the toxic office politics, the vaporware products that never actually launch. But we are fundamentally misdiagnosing the disease because we're ignoring the invisible mechanics of how the people in the room actually process reality.
Which is the exact mission of our deep dive today. We are pulling from the core insights of The Whole Brain Business Book by Ned Herman and Ann Herman-Nady.
It's a classic for a reason.
It really is. And early on, the authors drop a thesis statement that just it forces you to completely reevaluate your own career. The quote is, and listen to this, "Because every business runs on its thinking, optimizing thinking is the key to better performance."
It is an elegantly simple sentence with terrifyingly massive implications.
Yeah.
Because if you accept that premise, it means every structural problem you have is actually a cognitive problem.
Right. It shifts the entire paradigm of blame. It tells you that the disastrous product launch last quarter or that one boss you absolutely cannot stand working for is almost never about incompetence.
No, rarely.
And it's rarely about deliberate malice either. It is, at its core, a thinking problem. It's a mismatch of cognitive machinery.
Exactly.
So today, we're going to unpack the hidden hardwired thinking styles that govern everything from your daily team conflicts to how, billion-dollar innovations are structured. We're going to explore how you can map your own blind spots, decode the people around you, and ultimately become a dramatically sharper thinker and leader.
The stakes here are profoundly high because the book argues that most individuals, and by extension, entire corporate cultures, rely incredibly heavily on just one dominant style of thinking.
Just one.
Yeah, they are so entrenched in their preferred cognitive pathway that they are literally blind to the others.
Right.
They don't just disagree with other styles. They don't even recognize them as valid ways of interpreting the world.
I want to pause on that for a second because the concept of a cognitive blind spot is just fascinating to me.
Oh, it's huge.
If I'm sitting on a Zoom call, right, and I am fundamentally blind to how half my team is processing the information I'm giving them, how do we even begin to measure that?
You can't fix a machine if you don't have the schematic.
Exactly. How do the authors actually diagnose this?
So that brings us to the core diagnostic engine of the book, which is the Herman Brain Dominance Instrument, or the HBDI.
Okay, the HBDI.
Now, it is crucial to understand that this is not a personality test.
Right, it's not like Myers-Briggs or something.
Exactly. It doesn't measure if you're an introvert or an extrovert, or if you're an agreeable person. It is an instrument specifically designed to measure your cognitive preference.
Interesting. Preference.
Yes. It maps the path of least resistance for your brain when it's processing information. And the authors divide human thinking into 4 distinct, highly specific quadrants.
Okay, let's unpack this. They label these quadrants A, B, C, and D. But before we get into what those letters actually mean, let's talk about how this is measured.
Sure.
Because I know if I hear 4 quadrants, my mind immediately goes to like a cheap online quiz that tells you what kind of sandwich you are.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
BuzzFeed for corporate management.
Yeah. But the HPDI is measuring something much deeper about how we handle cognitive load, right?
It is. The instrument forces you to make very specific choices between different types of problem-solving approaches.
Okay.
It's designed to strip away what you think you should do, what your boss wants you to do, and reveal what your brain naturally wants to do when it's under pressure.
So it's about default settings.
Precisely. Evolutionary psychology tells us that the brain is this massive energy-hogging organ. It wants to conserve calories at all costs.
Makes sense.
So over time, based on our upbringing, our education, our early career successes, our brains build neural superhighways.
Wow. Superhighways.
Yeah, we develop a preferred way of tackling problems because it literally costs us less biological energy to think that way. The HPDI maps those superhighways.
Okay, let's shine a light on these superhighways because I guarantee anyone listening to this is going to immediately recognize their own default setting.
Oh, without a doubt.
And probably exactly why their coworkers drive them completely crazy. So let's start with Quadrant A, the analytical thinker. What is the architecture of this mind?
Quadrant A is the realm of pure logic and quantitative fact.
Yeah.
If your superhighway runs through Quadrant A, your brain craves data.
Just give me the numbers.
Exactly. You are focused on numbers, rigorous critical thinking, and measurable outcomes. In a meeting, the Quadrant A thinker is the one who completely ignores the CEO's inspirational opening monologue.
And immediately flips to the appendix to look at the ROI spreadsheet.
You got it. They want proof. They care about what can be definitively quantified.
Right. They're the ones saying, show me the math or this conversation is over. They need the structural integrity of a fact.
Absolutely.
Okay, then we shift over to Quadrant B, which the book defines as the practical or organized thinker. This is a completely different kind of structure, right?
It is. If Quadrant A wants to know why the numbers make sense, Quadrant B wants to know how we are physically going to execute the plan.
The logistics.
Exactly. This quadrant thrives on process, detail, and timeline. They are the guardians of operational efficiency.
So they're the ones making the lists.
Oh, they love a list.
Yeah.
They don't just want a goal. They want a 50-point checklist, standard operating procedures, and a crystal clear chain of command.
Right.
The dopamine hit for a Quadrant B thinker comes from turning chaos into predictable order.
So if A is the architect drawing the blueprint, B is the project manager actually pouring the concrete.
That's a great way to put it.
But then we move into territory that totally defies blueprints and concrete. Quadrant C, the relational or emotional thinker, this operates on a completely different frequency.
Entirely different.
Yeah.
Quadrant C is focused almost exclusively on human connection.
Okay.
The defining metrics here aren't numbers or checklists. They're empathy, group harmony, and communication. A Quadrant C thinker walks into that same meeting we talked about earlier.
The one with the ROI spreadsheet?
Yeah, that one. And they aren't looking at the spreadsheet and they aren't looking at the project timeline. They're literally looking around the room, reading the body language of the team.
Wow. Because to them, the team is the project.
Exactly. They intrinsically understand this profound truth. A theoretically flawless business plan is utterly useless if the workforce is too alienated, burned out, or resentful to actually execute it.
Right, you can't manage people like they're numbers.
Exactly. They prioritize oxytocin and trust. They are the relational glue of any organization.
And finally, we hit Quadrant D, the experimental or strategic thinker. I feel like this is the domain of pure imagination.
It really is. We are talking about sweeping vision, disruptive innovation, big picture synthesis.
So they're the big idea people.
While quadrants A and B are firmly anchored in managing the reality of today, Quadrant D is living entirely in the abstract possibilities of tomorrow.
Right.
They are the ones looking for the paradigm shift. They don't care about optimizing the current process. They want to invent a completely new industry that makes the current process obsolete.
Okay, to make this incredibly concrete for you listening, let's look at how these four distinct cognitive engines would operate in a real-world scenario. Let's build an analogy here.
I love a good analogy.
Imagine planning a massive cross-country road trip with 4 friends.
Okay, a highly complex task requiring massive coordination.
Exactly. So the Quadrant D thinker, the visionary, they pick the destination. They say, we aren't just driving, we are going to drive to the edge of the Grand Canyon and camp under the stars. They provide the spark, the excitement.
But an exciting idea doesn't actually get the car out of the driveway.
Right. So the Quadrant A thinker steps in. They're the one calculating the gas mileage and the budget. They say, okay, to get to the Grand Canyon, gas will cost exactly this much. We need to average this many miles per gallon, and we can only afford to eat out 3 times. They provide the logical financial parameters.
They ensure the trip obeys the laws of physics and economics.
Exactly. Then the Quadrant B thinker takes those parameters. They're the one mapping the exact route. They say, I have plotted our course. We leave at 6:00 a.m. sharp. We stop for gas at exactly mile 300, and I've already booked all the hotels along the way. They turn the budget into a repeatable, mechanical reality.
And finally, the Quadrant C thinker.
Great. They look at all these incredibly rigid plans, the early mornings, the strict budget, and they say, if we lock 4 people in a car for 3 days under these conditions, we will literally murder each other.
So true.
So they create the playlist, they pack the snacks, they make sure to plan a stop at that weird roadside diner because they know it'll make everyone laugh. They make sure the people in the car are actually having fun.
That road trip analogy perfectly encapsulates the core argument of the book. No single thinking style is superior.
Right.
You cannot have a successful road trip with just a destination or just a budget. You must have all 4 components interacting.
But that feels so counterintuitive to how corporate culture actually operates.
Oh, completely.
We tend to build statues of the Quadrant D visionaries, the Steve Jobs archetypes, and we give massive bonuses to the Quadrant A quantitative analysts. We create this weird hierarchy of thinking.
We do, and it's a massive, massive blind spot.
Oh.
Because the book emphasizes that preference does not equal competence, and it certainly doesn't equal completeness.
Right.
We all have a default setting. When a crisis hits your desk, your brain immediately reaches for its favorite tool. If you are a B thinker, you instantly start making a list to control the anxiety.
It's because it feels safe.
Yes. If you are a C thinker, you immediately call a meeting to make sure everyone is emotionally okay.
Which means we naturally assume our preferred tool is the only valid tool. If I am the route planner, I think the visionary picking the Grand Canyon is just chaotic and dangerous. If I am the visionary, I think the route planner is a rigid, boring bureaucrat who's killing my vibe.
And that arrogance of preference is exactly where organizations begin to fracture. Because, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, the exact trait that makes you incredibly successful in your preferred quadrant is the exact same trait that will cause you to fail catastrophically when the context changes.
Wow.
Every single quadrant is a double-edged sword.
Okay, let's dig deeply into the mechanics of that failure. Let's look at the specific vulnerabilities of each style because this is where so much professional trauma actual comes from.
It really is.
Take Quadrant A, the analytical thinker. Their superpower is rigorous accuracy, but the book states their critical blind spot is a total disregard for human emotion. Why does an obsession with data cause them to fail?
Let's look at a classic corporate scenario.
Yeah.
A massive merger and restructuring.
Okay, high stress.
It's extremely high stress. A heavily Quadrant A executive team will look at the balance sheets of the 2 companies and say, mathematically, the synergies are perfect. We overlap in these 3 departments. If we execute a 15% reduction in force in those areas, we save $80 million and the new entity becomes hyper-profitable.
And on paper, they are factually correct.
Completely correct.
Yeah.
But a company isn't run on paper.
Right.
So they execute the layoffs with surgical mathematical precision. But because they view human emotion as an irrelevant, unquantifiable nuisance, they completely fail to anticipate the psychological fallout.
Oh, man.
The surviving employees are hit with massive survivor's guilt, paranoia, and a total loss of trust in leadership. Innovation completely stops because everyone is terrified to take a risk.
Of course they are.
And the top talent, sensing the toxic environment, immediately resigns.
So they solved the math equation perfectly, but they fundamentally destroyed the productive capacity of the workforce because they couldn't calculate the cost of fear.
Precisely. They missed the human variable and the merger fails.
That is brutal. Okay, now let's look at Quadrant B, the organized thinker. Their superpower is efficiency and reliability. But the book argues their fatal flaw is a profound resistance to change.
Yes.
Now wait, I really want to push back on this because in any business I've ever seen, the highly organized person, the one who never drops a ball, who keeps everyone accountable, who builds the systems, that person is usually the MVP.
They often are, yeah.
Are the authors seriously arguing that the most reliable person in the office might actually be the biggest bottleneck when a company needs to pivot?
It is a brilliant paradox. The organized Quadrant B manager is indeed the MVP during times of stability. When the environment is predictable, their efficiency generates massive value.
Okay.
But consider a scenario of sudden, violent market disruption, like, say, a new AI technology rendering your core product obsolete overnight.
Right. The environment goes from predictable to totally chaotic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In that moment, the company definitely needs to pivot.
Yeah.
You don't need the old checklist executed perfectly. You need to invent a completely new way of operating. But the Quadrant B thinker's brain is heavily invested in the security of the known process. Chaos literally terrifies them.
So what do?
Instead of adapting, their psychological defense mechanism is to grip the old systems even tighter. They demand more forms, more compliance, more endless process reviews, completely paralyzing the company's ability to move quickly.
Wow.
Their greatest strength-creating structure mutates into their greatest weakness, bureaucratic rigor mortis.
They literally build a perfect administrative cage while the ship is sinking. That makes so much sense. Okay, let's move to the other side of the brain map. Quadrant C, the relational thinker.
Ah, yes.
Their strength is profound empathy and team cohesion, but their blind spot is avoiding hard decisions.
Because their psychological true north is harmony. If you are a Quadrant C leader, your primary drive is to ensure everyone feels valued and connected. But leadership sometimes requires inflicting necessary pain.
Like firing a deeply beloved employee who is chronically underperforming, or killing a legacy project that a whole team has poured their hearts into for 2 years.
Exactly. When faced with a decision that will cause acute interpersonal friction, the Quadrant C thinker will often agonize. They will delay the decision, they will overcompromise, or they will try to find a consensus where absolutely none exists.
To keep the peace.
Just to keep the peace. And by prioritizing the immediate emotional comfort of the team over the strategic necessity of the business, they slowly let mediocrity infect the culture. Their empathy, which is beautiful in peacetime, completely paralyzes them when surgical, dispassionate action is required.
So they protect the feelings of the individual, but sacrifice the health of the whole organization.
That's exactly it.
And finally, we have the darlings of Silicon Valley. Quadrant D, the strategic, experimental thinkers. Their strength is visionary creativity. What could possibly be their fatal flaw?
A total, almost pathological blindness to operational reality.
Oh, wow.
The visionary founder can stand on a stage and pitch a future that is so compelling it raises hundreds of millions of dollars. But because they are entirely focused on the horizon, the granular details of the ground right in front of them are completely invisible.
The details are just like annoying speed bumps interrupting their genius.
Yes. They will sign a contract promising a revolutionary new feature to a massive client in 6 months, completely ignoring the fact that the engineering team has explicitly told them the physics of the software require at least 2 years to build.
Right, they just wave it away.
They aren't lying maliciously. They genuinely live in a cognitive reality where the vision is so clear to them, they assume the execution will just magically manifest.
And when it doesn't?
When the timeline collapses, they blame the team for lacking imagination, completely blind to their own failure to respect the laws of operational reality.
So if our default settings naturally lead us to these catastrophic blind spots, what is the defense mechanism? Are we just doomed?
Not at all. The book introduces a critical concept called mental flexibility.
Mental flexibility.
It's the realization that professional maturity is not about doubling down on your dominant style. It's about developing the metacognition to stretch into the styles that make you uncomfortable.
It's cognitive cross-training.
Exactly.
Like, if you know you are a naturally cold Quadrant A data analyst and you have to announce a major shift in compensation structure to the whole company, you have to consciously force your brain to step into Quadrant C.
Yes.
You have to actively ask, how will this terrify the staff, and how do I address their fear? Even if addressing feelings feels like a complete waste of time to your default programming.
It requires an immense active override of your ego. You have to accurately read the room and say, my natural instinct is to start brainstorming wild ideas, but this team is exhausted and bleeding cash. They don't need my Quadrant D vision right now. They need a Quadrant B execution plan to survive the week.
But let's look at what happens when people don't have that mental flexibility. What happens when you take these 4 fundamentally different cognitive engines with their vastly different definitions of reality and you lock them in a conference room together to solve a high-stakes problem?
Oh, this is where the framework explains almost every frustrating dynamic you've ever experienced at work.
I can't wait.
The authors argue a profound point. The vast majority of what we label as toxic personality clashes in the office are not personality problems at all.
Really?
They are epistemological clashes. They are fundamental disagreements about what constitutes valid information.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We've all sat in meetings and thought, this guy is deliberately missing the point to sabotage me, or she is just impossibly stubborn. But you're saying it's actually just the engine parts grinding against each other.
Exactly. Let's return to that meeting scenario.
Yeah.
Imagine a high-stakes meeting where a massive new strategic pivot is being proposed.
Okay, the CEO drops a bomb on the table.
The analytical person, the data thinker, immediately leans in and asks, where is the historical data to justify this? Show me the projected market share acquisition.
Right.
The relational person, the empathy thinker, completely ignores the data and asks, how is the culture going to absorb this? The frontline managers are already stretched to the breaking point.
And the visionary.
The strategic person, the quadrant D thinker, is staring at the ceiling saying, forget market share. How does this redefine our entire brand identity for the next decade?
And the tragedy here is that all three of them think the other two are completely derailing the meeting.
Yes.
The data person thinks the relational person is being soft and emotional.
Yeah.
The visionary thinks the data person is being a pessimistic, narrow-minded bean counter.
And this is where that epistemological divide is so crucial. When the quadrant A thinker dismisses the quadrant C thinker's concerns about employee burnout, it's not because the A thinker is an evil sociopath. It is because, in their cognitive architecture, valid information must be quantifiable. A number is true. A spreadsheet is true. An employee's feeling of being overwhelmed is subjective. It's messy. It's unquantifiable. Therefore, the brain categorizes it as invalid data and discards it.
Wow. And the reverse is true for the relational thinker. To them, human cohesion is the absolute bedrock of reality. If the team hates each other, the spreadsheet doesn't matter. So they look at the analytical thinker's obsession with numbers as dangerously delusional.
Exactly. They're looking at the exact same business problem, but their brains are filtering reality through entirely different parameters. And the authors point out that instead of recognizing this diversity as a strength, the standard corporate instinct is to eradicate the friction by building silos.
Oh, we love a silo. We physically separate the cognitive styles.
We do.
We put all the quadrant A thinkers in the finance and engineering buildings. We lock the quadrant D thinkers in the creative agency or the marketing department. We put all the quadrant C people in human resources.
We build massive, comfortable echo chambers. And it destroys holistic value because when the engineering department only talks to other analytical thinkers, they design a product that is technically flawless and highly efficient.
But because they had zero quadrant C empathy in the room, the user interface is totally incomprehensible to an actual human being.
Exactly. They solve the wrong problem perfectly.
It's like putting all the, the map readers in one car and all the playlist makers in another car and being confused when neither car actually has a good road trip.
The friction of cognitive diversity is not a bug in the system. The friction is the feature. The strongest, most resilient decisions are the ones that have survived the gauntlet of all four quadrants.
Well, let's be real for a second. That friction is exhausting.
It is incredibly tiring.
If we are all speaking different cognitive languages and we don't naturally trust the other quadrant's data, how do we actually bridge the gap? We can't just sit in a room and yell our own priorities at each other. We need a translation manual.
And that translation mechanism is one of the most immediately actionable insights in the entire book. The authors make it very clear the burden of communication is entirely on the sender, not the receiver.
Okay, wait, say that again?
The burden of communication is on the sender. People can only hear messages that are broadcast on their cognitive frequency. If you want to lead, you have to become a communication chameleon.
I have a personal anecdote that perfectly illustrates the failure of this.
Well, let's hear it.
Years ago, I had a boss who was the ultimate quadrant B, highly organized, process-driven leader, and I am naturally more of a quadrant D thinker.
A visionary.
Right. I came into his office with what I thought was a brilliant disruptive idea. I started painting this grand vision, waving my arms, talking about the future of the industry. Within 2 minutes, I could physically see his eyes glaze over.
Yep.
He cut me off, asked for a project plan, and killed the idea. I thought he lacked vision, but really, I just failed to translate my idea into his language.
That is a classic cognitive misfire. This raises an important question. How do you structure your daily communications? Are you just broadcasting on your own frequency?
Usually, yes.
Let's deconstruct that and look at the actual translation manual the book provides. If you need to persuade an analytical thinker, quadrant A, How do you structure that pitch?
Okay, so you strip out the adjectives and lead with the math. You don't walk in with a grand vision or a feeling.
No.
You walk in with a one-pager that says, this initiative will decrease operating costs by 12% over 4 quarters, and here is the verifiable case study. You give them the bottom line first, and you provide the raw data so they can verify your logic.
Perfect. What if you are pitching to your old boss, the organized quadrant B thinker?
I think of it like an audio equalizer. I have to turn down the big vision bass and turn up the step-by-step treble.
I like that.
I have to anchor the idea in structure. You don't start with the 10-year horizon. You start with tomorrow. You say, here is a new objective, and here is the exact step-by-step implementation plan. Step 1 is this, the deadline is Tuesday, and Sarah is accountable. You give them the timeline and the risk mitigation strategy. You have to prove to them that the chaos is contained.
Exactly. And what about the relational thinker in quadrant C?
You have to lead with the human context. If you send a quadrant C thinker a cold, bulleted email of demands, their brain interprets that as a subtle threat to the relationship.
It feels aggressive to them.
Exactly. You have to frame the work around the team. We are launching this new software because it's going to save the frontline staff 3 hours of grueling data entry a week, which will massively reduce their stress. You connect the task to the people.
Finally, the strategic quadrant D thinker.
You have to give them the ultimate why. If you start a meeting with a quadrant D visionary by going over the quarterly compliance checklist, they will mentally check out instantly. You have to start high up in the atmosphere. The reason we are enduring this painful software migration is because it will allow us to capture a totally new demographic and change how the market views our brand. You paint the horizon, and then you can eventually drag them down into the details.
It requires immense intentionality. You have to literally deconstruct your own communication style.
I think about it like building a bridge. You have to start building from their side of the river, not yours. If you just stand on your side and yell your brilliant ideas across the water, they are never going to hear you.
And the truly masterful whole brain leader knows how to build a bridge that connects all 4 shores simultaneously.
Wow, all 4 at once.
Yes, when they stand up at a town hall or when they draft a company-wide email, they intentionally hit all 4 frequencies to ensure total team alignment.
How exactly does a leader structure a message to do that without it sounding disjointed? I mean, that sounds impossible.
They use a very specific architecture. Why, what, how, and who.
Okay, break that down.
They start with the why for the D quadrant. Here is the big, exciting vision we are chasing. Then they immediately anchor it with what for the A quadrant. Here is the hard data and the financial metrics that prove this is a viable strategy.
Got it.
Then they outline the how for the B quadrant. Here are the next 3 specific operational steps we will take to ensure flawless execution. And finally, they cover the who for the C quadrant. Here is how we will support our people through this transition and why your specific role is vital to our success.
Vision, data, process, people. If you structure a pitch like that, you have systematically eliminated the cognitive resistance from every single person in the room. You've spoken everyone's native tongue.
It's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
But aligning the team's communication is only the prerequisite.
Right, getting them to listen is step 1.
The ultimate test of this framework is whether you can use that aligned team to actually create net new value. Which brings us to the most complex challenge any company faces, the anatomy of innovation.
Innovation is the holy grail. Everyone wants it, companies die without it, and yet most attempts at corporate innovation feel like incredibly expensive, frustrating theater.
Oh, they usually are.
But the authors make a very bold claim here. They argue that true innovation is not just a quadrant D creative activity. It requires a highly specific, sequenced interaction of all 4 quadrants.
It is a 4-step sequence, and it is arguably the most counterintuitive part of the entire book.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's outline the sequence they propose for generating viable innovation. Step 1, analytical. Analyze the problem. Step 2 is organized, plan the solution. Step 3 is relational, involve the people. And step 4 is strategic, generate new ideas.
Okay, wait. I have to push back hard on this sequence.
Go for it.
I am looking at this and it feels completely backwards.
Yeah.
Generate new ideas. The actual creative act is listed as step 4. Every innovation consultant, every design thinking workshop starts with the brainstorming phase.
Right, the sticky notes.
Exactly. You get the team in a room, you pass out the sticky notes, you say there are no bad ideas, and you try to spark the quadrant D vision. So what does this all mean? Why on earth would the authors tell us to do data analysis and process planning before we even come up with the idea?
Because the authors understand the pathology of corporate brainstorming. They recognize a phenomena that destroys millions of dollars in R&D, which they call empty brainstorming.
Empty brainstorming, what is that?
Yes. When you start an innovation cycle with step 4, just generating wild ideas with absolutely no constraints, you end up with a whiteboard full of incredibly exciting concepts that are totally untethered from the reality of the business. The strategic thinkers have a blast, but the analytical thinkers are sitting there silently fuming because they know the company doesn't have the capital to build any of it.
And the organized thinkers.
The organized thinkers are having panic attacks because there is no existing supply chain to support these wild ideas.
It's the spark plug firing in the open air, with no engine block to actually contain the explosion.
Exactly. It creates a momentary high, followed by massive organizational cynicism when none of the ideas ever become reality. So the authors completely flip the script. They argue that true creativity is actually fueled by rigid constraints.
Okay, let's walk through the sequence. Step 1, analytical.
You start by meticulously defining the actual problem using hard data. You don't ask, what cool things should we build? You ask, what specific market gap is costing us market share, and what are our exact financial constraints for solving it? You build a box of factual reality.
Build the box. Okay, step 2, organized.
You define the structural reality. What existing manufacturing processes can we leverage? What is the unmovable timeline for this launch? What compliance regulations must we adhere to? You reinforce the walls of the box.
Step 3, relational.
You gather the human context. You talk to the customer service reps and ask, what do our customers actually complain about? You talk to the engineers and ask, what are you actually capable of building without burning out?
So by the time you finally get to step 4 and you unleash the Quadrant D strategic thinkers to generate ideas, they aren't just dreaming in the void.
No.
They are forced to direct their immense creative power to solve a highly defined problem within a specific budget using an existing timeline that actually serves the human beings involved.
The constraints act like a magnifying glass, focusing sunlight into a laser. The ideas they generate in step 4 won't be vaporware. They will be highly targeted, mathematically viable, structurally sound, and deeply empathetic solutions.
That is brilliant.
By forcing the A, B, and C quadrants to set the stage, the D quadrant innovation becomes incredibly potent and actually executable.
That reframes the entire concept of a brainstorming meeting. You don't start with the sticky notes, you start with the brutal facts.
Always.
But managing that process, holding the visionaries back while the data is gathered, keeping the process people from prematurely killing the weird ideas once the brainstorming finally starts, that requires a conductor who knows exactly how to wield this framework.
It requires a whole brain leader.
Let's define that, because it sounds like a superhuman requirement. Are the authors saying the ideal leader is perfectly balanced, like exactly 25% in each quadrant?
Not at all. A perfectly balanced profile is incredibly rare and honestly not strictly necessary.
Okay.
A whole brain leader is simply someone who possesses intense cognitive self-awareness. They know their own default biases and they actively compensate for them.
So they don't just hire a bunch of mini-me's.
Exactly. They don't hire clones of themselves. They intentionally hire people who think differently, and they actively protect those diverse voices in the room. They know how to shift the cognitive gears of the organization depending on what the complex, chaotic environment demands.
They know when to let the quantitative analysts drive the car and when to hand the keys over to the visionaries.
Exactly.
But, as powerful and elegant as this entire framework is, we have to address the massive scientific elephant in the room.
We do. We have to look at this impartially and address the academic critique, which is substantial.
Right. Because the HBDI and this entire 4-quadrant model is deeply rooted in lateralization theories of the brain, the classic left brain versus right brain paradigm. The idea that logic lives exclusively on the left side of your skull and creativity lives on the right.
Right, which we now know is
a massive oversimplification. Modern neuroscience and psychology have largely debunked that.
They absolutely have. The critique from the neuroscientific community is completely valid. The physical, biological brain does not have rigid, color-coded borders.
Right.
You don't have a specific lobe entirely dedicated to reading spreadsheets and a different lobe specifically for feeling empathy.
The brain is heavily interconnected. Neuroplasticity the corpus callosum firing across hemispheres, complex neural networks functioning simultaneously, to say this is left brain thinking is biologically inaccurate.
It is a biological heuristic, not an anatomical fact. So we have a profound tension here.
Yeah.
An academic neuroscientist looks at the whole brain model and says, this diagram is scientifically oversimplified. The brain's synapses are far too fluid for these neat little boxes.
But on the other hand, a Fortune 500 CEO or a frontline manager looks at this exact same model and says, I don't care about the complex synaptic pathways. Using this 4-quadrant framework just saved my leadership team from literally tearing each other apart.
Exactly. It's the classic divide between academic precision and operational utility. There's a famous quote from the statistician George Box. All models are wrong, but some are useful.
I love that.
The authors of this book defend their framework precisely on the grounds of immense utility. Is the map a perfect atom-for-atom representation of the territory? No. But does the map prevent you from walking off a cliff in the dark?
Yes. Human beings trying to coordinate complex tasks under massive stress desperately need heuristics. We need frameworks to make sense of the invisible chaos of human behavior.
We crave it.
If an executive is trying to mediate a screaming match between their lead engineer and their head of marketing, telling them, well, the brain is a highly complex, interconnected neural network with billions of synapses, is scientifically true, but it is completely useless advice in that moment.
Precisely. You cannot manage a crisis with abstract neuroscience. But if you give that executive the 4-quadrant model, you give them a lens. More importantly, you give the entire organization a shared non-judgmental vocabulary.
And that explains why the source material is rated the way it is in reviews. It gets 3 stars for scientific depths, acknowledging the oversimplification, but it gets a massive 5 out of 5 stars for practical value and clarity.
Because it is utilized globally in HR and leadership training.
Because the true value of the HBBI isn't in improving neurobiology. The immense value is in its ability to depersonalize conflict.
That right there is the golden insight, depersonalizing the conflict.
Think about how transformative it is for a team to have this language. Instead of a meeting devolving into personal attacks like you are being ridiculously stubborn or you are totally disorganized.
A team member can pause and say, hey, I think we have been stuck in quadrant A analysis for an hour and we are spinning our wheels. Let's intentionally shift the room into quadrant D and brainstorm some ways out of this.
It totally removes the ego. You aren't attacking a person, you are just shifting the cognitive mode of the meeting. It turns a personality clash into a mechanical adjustment.
It elevates the entire culture, from emotional reactivity to strategic metacognition.
We have covered an incredible amount of intellectual ground today. From the invisible cognitive roots of corporate failure, to the double-edged sword of our mental preferences, to the friction of the internal combustion engine, to the translation manuals of leadership, let's distill the absolute essential takeaways for you listening.
The foundational takeaway is that cognitive diversity is the ultimate competitive advantage, but it requires active management.
Right.
Surrounding yourself with people who think exactly like you feels incredibly comfortable, but it is a guaranteed recipe for massive organizational blind spots.
Yeah.
The strongest strategies survive the friction of all 4 quadrants.
Second, you cannot lead others until you diagnose yourself. You must develop intense self-awareness about your default cognitive pathway, and you must be brutally honest about the specific vulnerabilities that your preferred style creates.
Third, the burden of communication is on the leader. You must become a chameleon, translating your vision into the dialects of data, process, and people to ensure true alignment.
And finally, the ultimate goal is mental flexibility. The most valuable professionals are the ones who can read the complex demands of the moment, suppress their own ego, and stretch into whatever cognitive quadrant the team requires to survive.
Because the core thesis remains absolute. Every business, every relationship, every human endeavor runs on its thinking. If you can optimize the thinking, you optimize the outcome.
Which brings us back to that invisible disease we started with, the murky waters of why teams fall apart. Once you put on this lens, the water clears. You realize the failure wasn't a mystery, it was just clashing cognitive frequencies.
Yeah.
And once you can identify those frequencies, you can finally start to tune them.
You can turn the grinding friction of the engine into forward momentum.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. We've established that your dominant thinking style is essentially a neurological comfort zone. So look at your own calendar for tomorrow. Look at the specific meetings you have lined up, the emails you need to write, the problems you need to solve.
Like a really close look.
Are you structuring your entire day to allow yourself to hide in your preferred quadrant. And if the neuroscientists are right, if our brains are actually deeply interconnected and highly plastic, capable of forming new pathways at any age, then what is actually stopping you from actively choosing to flex a completely different thinking style in your very next interaction?
It's a great question to ask yourself.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Go out there and embrace the friction this week. We'll catch you next time.